The firing range at Riverside Police Department had no insulation from judgment. Officer Sarah Mitchell stood near the edge of the group, her uniform immaculate but conspicuously missing the special tactics insignia that everyone else wore. Her badge was regulation polished, but it told a story of exclusion that everyone could read. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Around her, veteran officers traded war stories and inside jokes like currency, their voices echoing off the concrete walls. Someone cranked up the radio scanner, only to be ignored, as another officer reenacted a high-speed pursuit using hand motions and sound effects. Sergeant Ryan Cooper gestured wildly, his audience of senior officers laughing at his dramatic demonstration. Officer James Wilson tapped his boots against the metal bench, keeping rhythm with his own animated retelling of a standoff in downtown Riverside. Sarah waited. She always waited. Her customized shooting log remained tucked under her arm. Precise calculations already memorized, but ready for reference. The numbers were her anchor in a room where gut instinct ruled, and procedures were often treated as suggestions. Her name wasn't called until the final 2 minutes of the pre-qualification briefing. Captain Michael Bennett, the rangemaster, barely glanced up from his clipboard as he rattled off assignments. Mitchell, Lane 5. First time on point for the tactical qualifier. Watch her stance on follow-through. The words came, clipped, half-read, tucked into the last line of the day's roster like an afterthought. A few heads turned briefly toward her, then turned back to more interesting conversations. No questions were asked about her readiness. No notes were taken about her assignment. She might as well have been invisible. Captain Bennett droned through the qualification parameters in practiced cadence. Time limits, target distances, scoring zones, disqualification criteria. Each detail met with nods and casual jokes from the tactical unit veterans. Sergeant Cooper cracked his knuckles and muttered something about easy marks to the officer beside him. Officer Wilson pulled out his phone to check messages, barely listening to the briefing that could determine career advancement. Sarah followed every word. Her blue pen moved in short, fluid bursts across her custom range card. She already knew the baseline numbers by heart: optimal grip pressure, breathing patterns, sight picture alignment, trigger control sequences, but she marked them anyway. Not for reassurance, but for calibration. In a world where everyone else shot by instinct, she shot by precision. When the floor opened to last-minute questions, Sarah cleared her throat. The sound seemed to surprise some of the officers, as if they'd forgotten she was there. She spoke in a steady, even tone. There's a tolerance issue with the new duty ammunition lot number 47B. The powder load is inconsistent, which may cause unpredictable muzzle rise on rapid sequences. I'd recommend compensating with a slight forward pressure adjustment. The room didn't exactly fall silent, but conversations quieted. 1 or 2 range instructors glanced up, their expressions neutral, but unmoved. Technical Officer Greg Martinez, stationed near the ammunition locker, laughed under his breath and muttered something about princess gloves to his partner. Captain Bennett didn't even look up from his clipboard. It's fine, we tested it last week. Just shoot the course. His tone wasn't cruel, just uninterested. Polished, final, dismissive. The kind of response that ended conversations before they could begin. Sarah didn't push back. She nodded once and returned her focus to the range card in her lap. Around her, the room moved on as if she'd never spoken. Target profiles scrolled across the screen. Jokes resumed. Someone opened an energy drink and tapped it against another officer's holster in a mock toast. No one said her name again. No one asked follow-up questions about the ammunition issue, her years of meticulous preparation, her detailed knowledge of ballistic systems, her careful attention to manufacturer specifications, all of it dismissed with 4 words: just shoot the course. When the group dispersed, Sarah was one of the last to stand. Her range card stayed neatly folded, tucked inside her notebook alongside checklists she'd reviewed dozens of times. She clicked her blue pen into its designated pocket, picked up her equipment bag, and walked past the cluster of instructors without being acknowledged. The assignment board near the exit told the story clearly. Officer names and lane numbers for today's qualification were listed in neat columns. Sarah's name appeared last: Mitchell, Lane 5. No tactical unit designation beside it, No nickname, no personal notes, just a name and a number, as if she were equipment rather than an officer. Outside, the California sun created sharp lines between shadow and glare. Officers in mirrored sunglasses strolled across the parking lot, nodding at each other, tossing gear bags over shoulders, trading pre-qualification banter at full volume. The air buzzed with anticipation and competitive energy, the kind of atmosphere that made everything feel urgent and consequential. Sarah adjusted her grip on her equipment bag and walked toward the range entrance. She'd been here before, overlooked, underestimated, treated like a procedural afterthought. But today felt different. Today she carried knowledge that could matter. The ammunition issue wasn't theoretical. She'd seen the test data, read the manufacturer reports, understood the implications. Whether anyone else believed her or not, she would shoot prepared. She would shoot smart. And if her analysis was right about the ammunition inconsistency, she might be the only one who could handle what was coming. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of gun oil and hot concrete. Somewhere in the distance, the first shots of the day's warm-up were already echoing across the range. Sarah quickened her pace, her boots clicking against the pavement with the rhythm of someone who knew exactly where she was going. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The qualification area buzzed with controlled chaos. Range officers moved between shooting lanes with the efficiency of a choreographed dance, checking safety protocols, adjusting target systems, and running final diagnostics. Officers clustered around their assigned positions, some chatting casually, while others reviewed last-minute details on their phones. Sarah approached the check-in station where a young officer, Corporal David Wells, sat behind a wheeled console. His eyebrows lifted slightly when he saw her approaching, a reaction she'd grown accustomed to. New faces always seemed surprised to see her in tactical gear. "You with the qualification group?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "Yes," Sarah replied, keeping her tone professional. Lane 5. Wells hesitated, glancing at his tablet screen, then back at her. "Fifth position." "Really?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. "That's correct," she said, maintaining her neutral expression, though something in his tone suggested confusion about her assignment. He looked at the roster again, then stepped aside without comment. She signed her initials on the digital log and moved on, but not before catching his whispered conversation with another range officer. They got the rookie on-point position today. Weird choice. The Glock 19 assigned to her sat in Bay 5. Its finish was worn, but well-maintained, showing the careful attention of the department armorer. The grip showed signs of recent replacement, and the slide moved smoothly when she performed her safety check. This wasn't the newest weapon in the department's inventory, but it was hers for the qualification. Sarah began her pre-qualification inspection, a ritual she'd performed hundreds of times but never rushed. She checked the barrel alignment, examined a firing pin, tested the magazine release spring tension. Her gloved hand touched the trigger guard lightly, almost ceremonially. It was a habit she'd developed during training. Machines spoke before they failed, if you knew how to listen. Behind her, laughter rose from the next preparation area. Sergeant Cooper and Officer Wilson were recounting something about a training exercise malfunction and an instructor who'd lost his composure. Their voices carried easily across the range, full of confidence and camaraderie. "Remember when Pearson's red dot sight fell off mid-course?" Cooper's voice boomed. "The guy still hits center mass on pure muscle memory," Wilson replied, slapping his knee. "That's what separates the naturals from the textbook shooters." Sarah kept inspecting her weapon, checking every component with methodical precision. She'd heard variations of these stories countless times, tales of officers overcoming equipment failures, surviving close calls, earning respect through sheer instinct. What she rarely heard were stories about officers who prevented problems through careful preparation, who avoided disasters through technical knowledge rather than raw reflexes. Her weapon preparation was meticulous. She ran the same checks she'd practiced since academy days, but always at her own rhythm. Nothing rushed, nothing skipped. Inside her equipment bag, she clipped her laminated ballistics chart, a custom reference card covered with trajectory tables and handwritten notations that adjusted for temperature, humidity, and ammunition variations. The chart wasn't store-bought or department-issued. She'd created it herself, cross-referencing manufacturer specifications with real-world performance data, environmental factors, and weapon-specific variables that most officers either ignored or trusted to instinct. The numbers were precise, tested, and proven. She'd memorized most of the calculations, but the chart served as confirmation, proof in mathematics that she belonged on this range. As she settled into her shooting lane, Sarah could hear conversations from nearby positions. Technical Officer Martinez was discussing weekend plans with his shooting partner. Sergeant Cooper was running through his qualification strategy with theatrical flair, making jokes about each target scenario as he loaded his magazines. "Scoring zone's looking good," Cooper announced to no one in particular. "Not that I need to worry about them. These courses practically shoot themselves." Sarah said nothing, but her fingers traced the edge of her custom ballistics chart. The ammunition issue she'd mentioned in the briefing hadn't been theoretical speculation. She'd spent hours researching the lot number, cross-referencing quality control reports, and identifying patterns in performance inconsistencies. The data was clear. Certain conditions could cause the powder loads to burn irregularly, potentially leading to unpredictable recoil patterns during rapid-fire sequences. She tried to share this information to prevent potential problems for the entire qualification group. The response had been predictable: dismissal, mockery, and the kind of institutional arrogance that treated preparation as weakness and confidence as competence. Her ear protection was already secured, her shooting glasses positioned perfectly on the bridge of her nose. The lenses were clean, their surface reflecting the afternoon sun in geometric patterns. She took a slow breath and began her final mental checklist, each step activated in precise sequence. The radio crackled to life as other officers began checking in with range control. Their voices carried easy confidence, the casual banter of professionals who'd done this hundreds of times before. No one seemed concerned about ammunition variables, environmental factors, or ballistic calculations. They shot by instinct, by experience, by the collective wisdom of officers who'd survived long enough to earn their qualifications. Sarah shot by numbers. It had always been her way, even when it marked her as different, even when it made her seem overly cautious or insufficiently bold. She trusted mathematics over intuition, preparation over improvisation, careful calculation over confident assumption. Today, that difference might matter. Today, her methodical approach might be the only thing standing between a successful qualification and a dangerous mistake. She closed the lane divider, sealing herself into the familiar solitude of the shooting position, and began the final countdown to the qualification course. Outside, the sun was high overhead, casting minimal shadows across the range. The qualification window was opening, and soon the entire tactical unit would be firing. Trusting their instincts, their training, and their luck to earn passing scores, Sarah trusted her numbers. In a few minutes, she'd learn whether that trust was justified. The ammunition showed its inconsistency almost immediately after the qualification began. As Sarah's first magazine emptied into the target, she watched the recoil pattern with growing concern. The pistol was jumping more than it should, creating a vertical dispersion that would have been invisible to most shooters, but stood out like a beacon to someone who'd memorized every normal recoil characteristic of the weapon. At the fifth shot, the muzzle flip was excessive, creating a point-of-impact shift that would have been mission-critical in a real-world scenario. According to her calculations, factoring in grip pressure, stance stability, and normal powder load specifications, she should have been looking at a 1.2-inch group. What she was seeing was closer to 2.5 inches, more than double the expected dispersion. The mathematics in her head ran the calculations automatically. At this apparent inconsistency rate, most shooters would be struggling to maintain minimum qualification scores by the third string of fire. But her pistol was functioning properly. Her fundamentals were solid. Every other performance indicator suggested normal operation. The ammunition was the only variable behaving unpredictably, exactly as she'd warned during the briefing. The radio crackled with check-ins from the other qualification positions. Lane 1. First string complete, adjusting for wind. Lane 2, showing normal patterns, proceeding to Stage 2. Lane 4, all hits in the A-zone, ready for movement drill. When her turn came, Sarah keyed the microphone. Lane 5, first string complete, confirming significant powder load variation as predicted. Compensating manually. The response came quickly from range control. Captain Bennett's voice, crisp and authoritative. Copy inconsistency report. Stand by, lane 5. Pause qualification. The order was standard procedure. Textbook protocol for any equipment anomaly. Suspend the exercise. Return to starting position. Wait for range officers to inspect the issue. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She glanced at her target downrange, then at the ammunition remaining in her magazine. The qualification was spreading across the tactical unit, already showing signs of disruption. Lane 1 had overshot the timing window by several seconds. Lane 2 was showing irregular grouping patterns. Lane 4 was adjusting stance mid-course, disrupting the careful choreography of the qualification sequence. She ran the numbers in her head one more time. Visual performance assessment based on actual shooting conditions, grip pressure optimization, stance adjustment, anticipatory compensation for powder inconsistency, all well within acceptable parameters. The qualification could continue safely with proper technique adjustments. Range control. This is lane 5, she finally responded. Request permission to continue qualification with manual compensation techniques. Issue is manageable with adjusted fundamentals. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Then, lane 5, request denied. Confirm immediate suspension of fire. Qualify using standard department ammunition only. Sarah didn't toggle the radio again. Instead, she switched to internal focus, effectively tuning out the range officer's instructions. Her fingers found the ballistics chart clipped beside her position, tracing the penciled calculations she'd made that morning. She had prepared for this scenario, though she'd hoped it wouldn't be necessary. The landscape of paper targets downrange unfolded in the familiar pattern she'd memorized during countless hours of preparation. 2 silhouettes, a partial barricade, 3 scoring zones, a hostage scenario, and a timed reaction drill. She didn't need range commands or audible signals to know exactly where each target would appear and when to engage. The course itself was her map, and she'd studied it until every feature was burned into her memory. Radio chatter from the other officers grew more urgent as they encountered the ammunition issues, seeing unusual dispersion on approach vector, confirming sight alignment adjustment. Request clarification on scoring due to ammunition performance. Lane 3 experiencing inconsistent primer ignition, checking timing marks. Sarah continued her qualification in perfect silence. No radio calls, no complaints about equipment, no distractions from the pure mechanics of marksmanship. She'd effectively become a ghost in the qualification, untracked by range control, unsupported by the tactical unit, shooting on her own authority through a course that was becoming increasingly challenging for everyone else. The targets appeared exactly where her calculations had placed them. Distance, timing, presentation angle, all perfect. She armed her weapon and prepared for the final phase of the qualification. This was the moment that would validate months of preparation, years of careful study, and a career's worth of being underestimated. The last string of fire was flawless. Every round impacted precisely where she intended, creating a grouping so tight that from a distance it appeared to be a single whole. No drift, no dispersion, no correction needed. The mathematics had been perfect, and the execution had matched the theory. As she completed the qualification course, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The course was complete. Every target engaged successfully. The ammunition gauge still showed rounds remaining, but her pistol had functioned perfectly throughout. Her shot placement was exactly where her calculations said it should be. She'd completed the entire qualification manually, compensating for ammunition inconsistencies through pure technique, calculating impact points through mathematical principles, and timing her shots through methodical precision. While her colleagues struggled with unexpected recoil and unpredictable performance, she'd delivered a perfect score using nothing but knowledge, skill, and the kind of methodical planning that most officers considered unnecessary. The final evaluation was as smooth as the qualification itself. She removed her ear protection, secured her weapon according to protocol, and waited while the range officers approached her lane. The scoring was automatic and undeniable. The electronic target system had recorded every impact, measuring not just hits and misses, but exact placement, timing, and consistency. As the range officers gathered around the scoring console, Sarah could see their expressions shift from professional detachment to genuine surprise. The numbers on the screen told a story that contradicted everything they thought they knew about her. Perfect score, perfect timing, perfect shot placement. All achieved using ammunition that had caused problems for every other shooter on the line. Captain Bennett studied the results with narrowed eyes, then looked directly at her. "Officer Mitchell," he said slowly, "I think you better explain exactly how you managed what everyone else found nearly impossible." Sarah reached into her equipment bag and pulled out her laminated ballistics chart, covered with handwritten calculations, and worn smooth from years of use. She placed it on the scoring table where everyone could see it. "I used mathematics," she said simply. "The same calculations I tried to share with you this morning." The laminated chart lay on the table like evidence in a trial. Every officer in the group leaned forward to examine it, their expressions shifting from skepticism to amazement as they absorbed the meticulous handwriting, the complex calculations, and the precise notations that covered every inch of the surface. Technical Officer Martinez picked up the chart first, his experienced eyes scanning the trajectory formulas and recoil compensation calculations. "This is all hand-computed," he said, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "Every calculation, every correction factor, every environmental variable." Captain Bennett moved closer, studying the chart over Martinez's shoulder. The document was a masterpiece of preparation, a comprehensive reference that accounted for powder burn rates, temperature variations, humidity factors, and even minor variables like grip pressure fatigue and barrel heat accumulation. "How long did this take you to create?" Bennett asked, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by genuine curiosity. "About 6 months," Sarah replied. "I started after reading the quality control report about Lot 47B. I wanted to understand the ballistics well enough to shoot without relying on consistent ammunition performance." Sergeant Cooper spoke up from his position, his voice carrying a hint of the respect that had been absent that morning. "You mean you prepared for today's ammunition issues 6 months ago?" Sarah nodded. The quality control data suggested that certain environmental conditions could cause the powder to burn irregularly. I wanted to be ready if that happened. The group absorbed this information in silence. While they'd been shooting by feel and trusting standard performance, she'd been preparing for the day when that trust would be misplaced. Her excessive caution, her methodical approach, her insistence on understanding every variable, it had all been leading to this moment. Officer Wilson examined the chart more closely, tracing the penciled calculations with his finger. "These numbers, they match the qualification course exactly. You calculated the entire shooting sequence before we started." "I calculated multiple scenarios," Sarah explained. "Different environmental conditions, various ammunition factors, alternative shooting positions, emergency procedures. Today's qualification was just one of the profiles I prepared." The implications were staggering. She hadn't just completed a difficult qualification. She'd done it using a level of preparation that none of them had considered necessary. While they'd relied on instinct, she'd relied on knowledge. While they trusted their reflexes, she trusted her mathematics. Captain Bennett picked up the chart and studied it more carefully. The calculations were dense, complex, and entirely accurate. Every factor that could affect shooting performance was accounted for. Every variable that might impact accuracy was included. It was the work of someone who understood marksmanship not just as a skill but as a science. "Officer Mitchell," he said finally, "when you warned us about the ammunition problems this morning, why didn't you mention that you had prepared for this scenario?" Sarah's expression didn't change, but her voice carried a subtle edge. "I tried to warn you about the technical issues. I was told to just shoot the course." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Every person present remembered the morning briefing, remembered how her concerns had been dismissed, how her knowledge had been treated as unnecessary caution. They'd ignored her warning, and their qualification scores had suffered exactly the problems she'd predicted. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, "when I reported the ammunition inconsistency and requested permission to continue with compensation techniques, I was ordered to suspend fire. I chose to continue because I knew the issue was manageable with proper fundamentals. This was the crux of the matter. She'd disobeyed a direct order, but she'd been right to do so. Her knowledge had been more reliable than their protocols, her preparation more valuable than their procedures. She'd completed the qualification not despite the ammunition problems, but because she'd prepared for them. Technical Officer Martinez set the chart down carefully. "Ma'am, I've been working with department weapons for 12 years. I've never seen preparation this thorough. You didn't just plan for today's qualification. You planned for every possible variation of today's qualification." The compliment was sincere, professional, and long overdue. Around the range, other officers were nodding in agreement. The evidence was undeniable. She'd outperformed everyone, not through superior natural ability or better equipment, but through superior preparation. Captain Bennett stood up straight, his posture formal. "Officer Mitchell, I owe you an apology. We all do. Your warning this morning could have prevented the problems we experienced today." "More than that," Sergeant Cooper added, "your performance saved the qualification. Without your success, we'd be reporting a complete failure of the tactical unit to maintain proficiency standards." Sarah accepted the acknowledgments with the same calm demeanor she'd maintained throughout the ordeal. She wasn't gloating, wasn't demanding recognition, wasn't even showing satisfaction. She'd simply done her job, done it well, and proved that sometimes the quiet ones had the most important things to say. "The question now," Bennett continued, "is how we prevent this from happening again, and how we make sure we listen when someone with your level of preparation tries to share their knowledge." The range was transforming around her. The same officers who had ignored her that morning were now looking at her with respect, curiosity, and something approaching awe. She'd proven that meticulous preparation could overcome equipment inconsistency, that knowledge could triumph over instinct, that the careful ones sometimes knew things the confident ones missed. But more than that, she'd proven something to herself. She belonged in this unit, in this department, in this profession. Not because she could shoot like everyone else, but because she could shoot better than everyone else when it mattered most. The aftermath of the qualification created ripples that spread far beyond the confines of the range. Within hours, word of Sarah's achievement had reached the chief's office, the department training division, and the regional tactical command center. An officer who'd shot a perfect score using inconsistent ammunition while everyone else struggled was the kind of story that captured attention at every level of law enforcement hierarchy. Major Rebecca Anderson, the departmental training commander, requested a private meeting with Sarah that afternoon. The major's office was a study in professional efficiency. Commendations lined the walls, tactical manuals filled the bookshelves, and a large window overlooked the training yard where officers were running movement drills. "Officer Mitchell," Major Anderson began, gesturing for Sarah to take a seat. "I've been reviewing your performance record. Exceptional academy scores, perfect safety evaluations, consistently high marks in all technical assessments. Yet somehow you've been passed over for tactical unit assignment for nearly a year." Sarah sat with her characteristic calm composure. "Yes, ma'am. I've been waiting for a permanent assignment." Major Anderson leaned back in her chair, studying the young officer with new appreciation. "That's going to change. Effective immediately, you're being assigned to the department's Technical Advisory Committee. Your primary responsibility will be reviewing and implementing qualification protocols based on ammunition performance variables and environmental factors." The assignment was significant, a recognition that her methodical approach to marksmanship wasn't a weakness to be tolerated, but a strength to be utilized. For months, she'd been treated as an outsider who didn't fit the department's culture of confident improvisation. Now she was being asked to help shape that culture. "Additionally," the major continued, "I want you to develop a training program for ballistic compensation techniques. Today's incident showed us that we've become too dependent on consistent equipment performance. We need officers who can think and shoot like you do." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. The same careful preparation that had marked her as different, that had made her colleagues question her instincts and temperament, was now being recognized as exactly what the department needed. Her mathematical approach to marksmanship, her meticulous attention to technical details, her insistence on understanding rather than simply trusting, all of it was suddenly valuable. Meanwhile, the ripple effects continued throughout the department. Technical Officer Martinez had pulled the inventory records for all ammunition in current circulation. cross-referencing them against the quality control reports that Sarah had been studying. The pattern was clear. Lot 47B had been distributed to every division in the department, and each one was potentially susceptible to the performance inconsistencies she'd predicted. "We've got a department-wide issue," Martinez reported to his supervisor. "Every officer carrying this ammunition could experience the same problems. Most of them just don't know what to look for or how to compensate." An emergency equipment review was ordered for all duty ammunition. Every lot number would be inspected, every performance variable would be tested, and every officer would be briefed on potential inconsistencies. The quality control report that had been ignored in the morning briefing was now the subject of urgent action across multiple divisions. Back in the officers' locker room, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The same colleagues who'd barely acknowledged Sarah's presence that morning were now approaching her with questions, seeking her advice on technical issues they'd previously handled through instinct alone. Sergeant Cooper, who'd been among the most dismissive of her concerns, found himself asking about recoil management techniques. "Mitchell, when you're calculating compensation factors, how do you account for variable powder burns during rapid strings?" Officer Wilson wanted to understand her preparation methodology. "That ballistics chart you created, is that something you could teach to other officers? My qualification scores have been inconsistent for months." Even Captain Bennett, who dismissed her warning about the ammunition, was acknowledging the value of her approach. "Officer Mitchell, I'd like you to review all pending equipment requisitions and provide recommendations for training modifications." The transformation was remarkable. In the space of a single qualification, she'd gone from being the overly cautious outsider to being the officer everyone wanted to learn from. Her methodical approach, her attention to detail, her insistence on understanding every component, all of it was now seen as essential rather than excessive. But perhaps the most significant change was in how Sarah saw herself. For months, she'd questioned whether she belonged in a profession that seemed to value confidence over competence, instinct over analysis. She'd wondered if her careful approach was a weakness, if her need to understand rather than simply trust made her inferior to her more confident colleagues. Today had answered those questions definitively. She didn't need to change who she was to succeed. She needed to be more of who she was. Her strength lay not in becoming like everyone else, but in being the one person who could succeed when everyone else's methods failed. As evening approached and the department grew quiet, Sarah walked past the shooting range where the day's events had unfolded. The cleaning crew was still collecting brass casings, wiping down equipment, and resetting targets for the next day's training. She paused beside the lane she'd used that morning, the one whose electronic scoring system had recorded her perfect performance while others struggled. A maintenance technician was recalibrating the target sensors, the very equipment that had documented her achievement. "Excuse me, officer," the technician called out. "You're the one who aced the course today, right? I just wanted to say that was impressive. The system shows you hit the same spot so consistently that it initially registered as a malfunction. Never seen anything like it." It was a simple acknowledgement, but it carried weight. She'd demonstrated excellence, not through flashy techniques or natural talent, but through careful preparation and the courage to trust her knowledge over popular opinion. As she walked toward her car, Sarah reflected on the day's events. She'd always known she was different from her colleagues, had always approached shooting with more calculation and less instinct than seemed normal in law enforcement. Today had proven that different didn't mean wrong. Sometimes it meant essential. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to apply her methodical approach to policing. But tonight she could rest in the knowledge that she'd found her place in a profession that had seemed determined to overlook her. She belonged here, not despite her differences, but because of them. The next morning found Sarah in an unfamiliar position, standing before the department's tactical response team as they prepared for their monthly qualification. 20 of the department's most elite officers sat in folding chairs, equipment bags at their feet, eyes fixed on her with undisguised curiosity. "Today we're focusing on ammunition variables and environmental compensation," she announced, her voice steady and professional. "I've prepared reference materials for each of you covering the fundamentals of ballistic calculation and recoil management techniques." The tactical officers accepted her handouts with the kind of focused attention that had been absent from briefings just days earlier. Notebooks were open, questions were prepared, and nobody was checking their phones or making dismissive comments. Lieutenant Mark Reynolds, the tactical team leader who had initially opposed her assignment to the unit, raised his hand. Officer Mitchell, these compensation formulas for humidity factors, are they applicable across all calibers or just our duty weapons? It was exactly the kind of question that demonstrated how much the department's culture was shifting. Instead of dismissing technical details or assuming problems wouldn't affect them, they were now approaching each variable as a potential factor that required understanding and preparation. Good question, Sarah replied, advancing to the next slide in her presentation. The basic principles apply universally, but I've included caliber-specific correction tables on page 4 of your handouts. For tactical operations, I recommend memorizing at least the primary factors for your assigned weapons. The recommendation was accepted without debate. The team had learned the value of preventing problems rather than reacting to them, and Sarah's track record of identifying issues before they became critical had earned her the kind of credibility that transcended rank and experience. After the briefing, Major Anderson approached with a folder containing new departmental orders. Officer Mitchell, I have some news. You've been selected for the Advanced Ballistics Unit at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. It's a significant opportunity. You'd be working on cutting-edge weapon systems and helping design qualification protocols for agencies nationwide. The assignment was prestigious, the kind of opportunity that typically went to officers with years of specialized experience and proven leadership. For Sarah, it represented validation not just of her technical skills, but of her approach to law enforcement. The department was investing in her methodical mindset, her attention to detail, and her ability to think beyond conventional wisdom. There's one condition, the major continued with a slight smile. They want you to complete your ballistic compensation curriculum here first. Apparently, word of your training program has reached some very high levels, and they want every tactical officer in the region to have access to these skills. The curriculum Sarah had developed over the past weeks had indeed become something special. It combined traditional marksmanship principles with modern performance analysis, teaching officers to shoot effectively even when their equipment or conditions weren't ideal. The program had already improved qualification scores across the department, with some officers reporting 30% better accuracy in adverse conditions. Technical Officer Martinez, now heading the department's equipment division, had become one of her strongest advocates. What Officer Mitchell taught us, he often told visiting instructors, is that technology and equipment should enhance human capability, not replace it. When you understand the fundamentals, you can handle anything the job throws at you. The transformation extended beyond individual officers to the entire departmental culture. Quality control reports were now reviewed immediately upon receipt. Equipment anomalies were investigated thoroughly, rather than dismissed as isolated incidents. Officers were encouraged to ask questions, raise concerns, and challenge assumptions, rather than simply follow established routines. Perhaps most importantly, the department had learned to value different approaches to problem-solving. The officers who shot by instinct still had their place, but so did the officers who shot by calculation. The confident risk-takers were still appreciated, but so were the careful planners. Diversity of thought had become a strength rather than a source of division. As Sarah prepared her curriculum for department-wide implementation, she found herself partnered with some of the same officers who had once dismissed her methods. Sergeant Cooper, whose shooting style was almost completely opposite to hers, had become an unexpected ally. "The thing is, Mitchell," he explained during a curriculum planning session, "I still shoot primarily by feel and instinct. That's not going to change. But now I understand why your approach works too, and when to apply which method. That's what makes this training so valuable. It's not about replacing one approach with another, but knowing when each one is appropriate." This synthesis of approaches was proving far more effective than either method alone. Officers who understood both the instinctive and the analytical aspects of marksmanship were demonstrating performance levels that exceeded departmental standards by significant margins. The most dramatic evidence came during a regional tactical competition 3 weeks after Sarah's perfect qualification. The Riverside team, applying her ballistic compensation techniques alongside their traditional skills, dominated the event. They not only won the team competition, but placed 5 officers in the top 10 individual rankings, an unprecedented achievement that attracted attention from law enforcement agencies across the country. "It's not just about shooting better," Captain Bennett explained to visiting officials. "It's about understanding why we shoot the way we do, and having options when conditions aren't perfect." Mitchell taught us that preparation isn't the enemy of performance, it's the foundation of it. For Sarah, these changes represented more than professional validation. They demonstrated that excellence could come in different forms, that diverse approaches strengthened rather than weakened an organization, and that sometimes the quiet voices had the most important things to say. As she finalized the training materials that would be distributed to other departments, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Officer Ellie Parker, a new recruit fresh from the academy, knocked hesitantly on her office door one afternoon. "Officer Mitchell?" Parker stood awkwardly in the doorway, her uniform still showing the crisp creases of someone in their first weeks of service. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I just wanted to ask your advice about something." Sarah gestured for her to enter. "What can I help you with?" Parker closed the door and took a seat, her expression reflecting the particular combination of determination and uncertainty that characterized many new officers. "Some of the training officers have been telling me I'm too analytical, that I overthink my shooting technique instead of developing instinct. They say I need to be more aggressive, more confident, less concerned with the technical details." The words were painfully familiar. Sarah had heard variations of the same criticism throughout her early career. The suggestion that carefulness was a weakness, that preparation indicated a lack of natural ability, that attention to details somehow undermined real police work. "And what do you think?" Sarah asked. Parker straightened in her chair. "I think my approach works for me. My qualification scores are good, my accuracy is consistent, and I feel confident in my abilities. But I don't want to be labeled as..." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Too delicate for real police work?" Sarah suggested quietly. Parker's eyes widened slightly. "Yes, exactly that." Sarah considered her response carefully. This wasn't just about offering advice to a new officer. It was about helping someone navigate the same cultural challenges she had faced, about providing the support and perspective she had once needed but never received. "Officer Parker, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me when I was in your position," she began. "There is no single right way to be an effective officer. Some people work from instinct, others from analysis. Some trust their reflexes, others trust their preparation. The best officers find ways to combine all of these approaches, and the best departments create room for different kinds of excellence." Parker listened intently, the tension in her posture gradually easing. "The question isn't whether you're too analytical," Sarah continued. "The question is whether your approach produces results. Does your method help you perform effectively and safely? Does it give you confidence in your abilities? Does it allow you to handle the unexpected?" "Yes," Parker replied without hesitation. "I feel most confident when I understand the why behind the how." Sarah nodded. "Then don't apologize for being thorough. Don't try to become someone else to fit a particular image of what an officer should be. Your analytical approach isn't a weakness to overcome. It's a strength to develop." As Parker left the office, visibly relieved and newly determined, Sarah reflected on how much had changed. 6 months ago, she had been the one questioning her place in a profession that seemed designed for people different from herself. Now she was helping others navigate the same challenges, providing the guidance and perspective that might have saved her months of self-doubt. The department had evolved as well. The culture that once valued only one type of excellence was learning to appreciate diverse approaches. The officers who had dismissed her as too delicate, too cautious, too precise, were now incorporating her methods into their own training. The leadership that had overlooked her potential was now investing in her future. As Sarah sealed the final package of training materials for distribution to other departments, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Her journey had been challenging, but it had led to something important. Not just personal success, but institutional improvement. She had found her place not by conforming to expectations, but by demonstrating that different approaches could produce exceptional results. And in doing so, she had opened doors for others like herself, officers whose strengths might not be immediately obvious, whose contributions might not fit traditional patterns, but whose unique perspectives made the entire department stronger and more effective. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to apply her methodical approach to law enforcement. But today she could take pride in knowing that she had changed not just her own trajectory, but the culture of an entire organization. She belonged here, not despite her differences, but because of them. 6 months later, Sarah stood at the front of the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center's main auditorium in Glencoe, Georgia. The cavernous room was filled to capacity with tactical instructors from across the country, all gathered for the annual Advanced Weapons Systems Conference. Her presentation, Mathematical Approaches to Variable Ballistic Compensation, had been given the coveted opening slot, a recognition of how quickly her methods had transformed training protocols nationwide. "The core principle isn't complicated," she explained, her voice carrying confidently through the state-of-the-art sound system. "Marksmanship isn't just physical discipline, it's applied physics. When we understand the mathematical relationships between environmental factors, ammunition variables, and human technique, we can achieve consistency in any conditions." The audience listened with the intense focus of professionals who recognized genuine innovation. Notebooks were open, recording devices were running, and the questions being prepared reflected deep engagement with the material. This wasn't polite attention. It was the hungry curiosity of experts who had identified something valuable. Director Thomas Blackwell, the legendary former SWAT commander who now oversaw federal tactical training, raised his hand. "Officer Mitchell, your compensation formulas for crosswind factors, have you tested them in extreme weather conditions? Our teams in Alaska and Puerto Rico operate in radically different environments." It was exactly the kind of technically sophisticated question that demonstrated how completely her approach had been embraced by the tactical community. 6 months ago, she had been struggling to get anyone to listen to basic equipment concerns. Now she was discussing advanced ballistic theory with the nation's top firearms instructors. "Excellent question, Director," Sarah replied, advancing to her next slide. "We've conducted field testing in environments ranging from desert to Arctic conditions." The differential tables on page 7 of your handouts show the exponential correction factors needed for extreme temperature and humidity variations. She moved through her presentation with the quiet confidence that had become her trademark, methodical, precise, and thoroughly prepared. No dramatic flourishes, no unnecessary commentary, just the careful explanation of principles that had revolutionized how tactical teams approached qualification and field operations. When she finished, the applause wasn't just polite. It was enthusiastic, even from the veterans who had initially been the most skeptical of her methods. Commander James Prescott, the grizzled head of the FBI's Hostage Rescue Team Training Division, approached her afterward. "Mitchell," he said without preamble, "we've implemented your protocols across our sniper teams. Qualification scores are up 18% in adverse conditions, and our operational consistency has improved dramatically. The director wants to know if you'd consider conducting a specialized workshop for our instructors next month." These requests had become common. In the 6 months since her transfer to the Federal Training Center, Sarah had worked with tactical teams from more than 30 different agencies. Her ballistic compensation curriculum had been adopted by police departments, federal law enforcement organizations, and specialized units across the country. What made her approach so valuable wasn't just its technical precision, it was its adaptability. The core principles could be applied to any weapon system, any ammunition type, and any environmental condition. Officers who mastered her methods could maintain peak performance regardless of circumstances, a capability that had obvious operational advantages. "I'd be happy to work with your instructors," she told Commander Prescott. "Let me know what specific conditions they typically encounter, and I'll develop customized reference materials." As the conference attendees filed out for the lunch break, Sarah gathered her presentation materials and checked her phone. A text message from Major Anderson back at Riverside PD caught her attention. "Regional qualification scores just released. Our department ranked #1 in the state. Your curriculum is still working wonders. We miss you but proud to see what you're accomplishing." The message brought a smile to her face. Her former department had continued to embrace the methods she'd developed, building on her foundation to create a comprehensive approach to firearms training that combined technical precision with practical application. The results spoke for themselves: improved performance, increased confidence, and enhanced operational capability. As she walked toward the training center's dining facility, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. A year ago, she had been the outsider, the officer who was considered too delicate, too precise, too analytical for real police work. Her meticulous approach had been treated as a liability rather than an asset, her careful preparation as a sign of weakness rather than strength. Now she was at the forefront of a transformation in how law enforcement approached one of its most fundamental skills. The very qualities that had once marked her as different were the same ones that allowed her to see possibilities others had missed, to develop methods others hadn't considered, to solve problems others hadn't recognized. The afternoon session of the conference featured a panel discussion on next-generation weapons systems. Sarah had been asked to join 4 other experts to discuss how training protocols would need to evolve as technology advanced. The moderator, Dr. Cynthia Washington from the National Institute of Justice, opened with a provocative question. As weapons systems become increasingly computerized, with features like automated targeting assistance and digital ballistic calculation, will the skills Officer Mitchell has been teaching become obsolete? The question sparked a lively debate among the panelists. Colonel Robert Garcia from Army Special Forces argued that technology would eventually make manual compensation techniques unnecessary. Why calculate what a computer can do instantly and perfectly? He asked. Commander Prescott countered that over-reliance on technology created vulnerability. When systems fail, and they always fail eventually, officers need fundamental skills to fall back on. When it was Sarah's turn to respond, she took a moment to organize her thoughts. This wasn't just a technical question about training protocols. It went to the heart of how law enforcement viewed the relationship between human skill and technological assistance. I believe we're asking the wrong question, she began. The issue isn't whether technology will replace human skill, but how we can use technology to enhance human understanding. The mathematical principles I teach aren't just for making manual calculations. They're for helping officers understand why their weapons perform the way they do. She paused, noting the thoughtful expressions across the audience. An officer who understands ballistic fundamentals will use technology more effectively because they'll recognize when the technology is operating correctly and when it isn't. They'll know when to trust the system and when to override it. Most importantly, they'll never become dependent on tools they don't understand. The room grew quiet as her words resonated with the assembled experts. Even Colonel Garcia nodded slowly, acknowledging the wisdom in her perspective. Our goal shouldn't be to replace human judgment with automation, Sarah continued. It should be to develop officers whose judgment is so well informed that they can use any tool effectively or function without it if necessary. Technology should amplify capability, not substitute for understanding. Dr. Washington smiled. Beautifully stated, Officer Mitchell. That perspective should guide our approach to training for years to come. The discussion continued for another hour, covering topics from equipment standardization to qualification protocols. Throughout the exchange, Sarah noticed something significant. Her ideas weren't being treated as radical or controversial. They had become part of the mainstream conversation about law enforcement training, accepted as valid contributions to the profession's evolution. After the conference concluded for the day, Director Blackwell invited Sarah to join him and several other instructors for dinner at a local restaurant. As they walked across the training center campus, he mentioned something that caught her by surprise. Mitchell, I just received the final approval this afternoon. Starting next month, your ballistic compensation curriculum will be incorporated into the standard training for all federal law enforcement firearms instructors. Every agency from the FBI to Customs will be teaching your methods. The news was momentous. Federal standardization meant her approach would influence thousands of officers across dozens of agencies. What had begun as personal preparation for a single qualification had evolved into a nationwide training initiative. That's quite an honor, she replied, momentarily at a loss for words. Blackwell chuckled. Don't act so surprised. Your methods work. They're based on sound principles. They're teachable to officers with diverse backgrounds, and they produce measurable improvements in performance. In law enforcement, results speak louder than anything else. At dinner, the conversation turned to the future of tactical training. The other instructors, all veterans with decades of experience, sought Sarah's input on everything from recruit selection to advanced qualification protocols. Her perspective was valued not despite her different approach, but because of it. The thing that impresses me most about your methodology, said Special Agent Diana Reynolds, the FBI's chief firearms instructor, is how it bridges the gap between the intuitive shooters and the technical shooters. For years, we've treated those as separate paths, almost like competing philosophies. Your approach shows how they can complement each other. Sarah nodded. I think that's because marksmanship has both scientific and artistic elements. The physics of ballistics is pure mathematics. Predictable, calculable, consistent. But the human application of those principles involves feel, timing, and adaptation. The best shooters understand both aspects. And that's what makes your curriculum so effective, added Commander Prescott. You're not just teaching formulas. You're teaching officers how to integrate precision with practice, calculation with instinct. As the evening progressed, Sarah reflected on how completely her professional world had transformed. A year ago, she had been struggling to get 5 minutes of attention during a briefing. Now she was helping shape national training standards alongside the most respected instructors in law enforcement. The difference wasn't that she had changed who she was. It was that she had found an environment where her unique perspective was recognized as valuable. She hadn't needed to become more aggressive, more instinctive, more conventionally tactical. She had needed to find the place where her meticulous approach could make its greatest contribution. The next morning, Sarah arrived early at the training center's main range complex. She had scheduled a demonstration of her methods using the center's environmental simulation system, a sophisticated facility that could reproduce everything from desert heat to Arctic winds, allowing instructors to practice in controlled but challenging conditions. As she prepared her equipment, she noticed a young instructor watching from nearby. Lieutenant Sophia Reyes from the Los Angeles Police Department approached hesitantly. "Officer Mitchell, I hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to observe your preparation routine. Your presentation yesterday was incredible." Sarah smiled. "You're welcome to observe, Lieutenant. I'm just setting up for the environmental demonstration." Reyes stayed to watch, her expression reflecting the particular combination of professional curiosity and personal uncertainty that Sarah recognized immediately. After several minutes of silence, the younger officer spoke again. "Can I ask you something that's not exactly about the technical aspects?" "Of course." Reyes glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. When did you become confident enough to stick with your approach?" "I'm having some challenges at my department. My captain says I'm too textbook. That I need to develop more aggressive instincts if I want to advance to the tactical unit." The situation was so familiar that Sarah felt an immediate connection to the younger officer. Here was someone facing the same cultural barriers, the same dismissive attitudes, the same pressure to conform to a narrow definition of what a tactical officer should be. "Lieutenant Reyes, what's your qualification score?" 97% consistent across all conditions, Reyes replied without hesitation. "And your safety record?" "Perfect. 5 years without a single range violation or close call." Sarah nodded. "Those aren't textbook results. They're excellent results. The question isn't whether your approach matches someone else's expectations. It's whether it produces the performance your job requires." Reyes seemed to stand a little straighter. "That's what I keep telling myself. But when everyone around you says you're doing it wrong, you start to doubt yourself," Sarah finished for her. "I know that feeling very well. But here's what I learned. Sometimes what others see as weakness is actually unrecognized strength. Your analytical approach isn't holding you back, it's just a different path to the same destination." They talked for another 20 minutes, discussing specific techniques and strategies for navigating departmental cultures that valued certain approaches over others. Sarah shared her experiences, offered practical advice, and most importantly, validated the younger officer's instinct to trust her own methods, rather than abandoning them for someone else's. As Reyes departed for her own session, she turned back with renewed confidence. "Thank you, Officer Mitchell, not just for the technical advice, but for showing that there's more than one way to be excellent at this job." The exchange left Sarah thoughtful as she completed her preparations for the demonstration. Her journey hadn't just been about personal validation or professional advancement. It had created a pathway for others who approached law enforcement differently, who brought unique perspectives and methodologies to a profession that needed diversity of thought as much as diversity of background. When the demonstration began, the environmental chamber was filled with senior instructors from across the country. The simulation started with standard conditions: moderate temperature, no wind, optimal lighting, then gradually introduced complications. Heat increased, raising barrel temperature. Wind gusts created variable crosscurrents. Lighting shifted from bright to dim, challenging sight picture acquisition. Throughout the sequence, Sarah maintained perfect accuracy, adjusting her technique according to the mathematical principles she had developed. Each shot struck precisely where intended, demonstrating in real time how her approach could overcome environmental challenges that typically degraded performance. The instructors watched with professional appreciation, recognizing the extraordinary skill on display. But what impressed them most wasn't just her accuracy, it was her consistency, her methodical adaptation to changing conditions, her ability to maintain performance when everything around her was designed to disrupt it. After the final sequence, Director Blackwell addressed the assembled group. What you've just witnessed isn't just technical proficiency. It's a different way of thinking about our fundamental skills. Officer Mitchell isn't just an excellent shooter. She's an innovator who has identified principles that can make all of us better at what we do. As the instructors filed out, discussing what they had seen and how they might apply it in their own training programs, Sarah began cleaning her weapon with the same methodical precision she applied to everything. Each component received careful attention. Each surface was inspected and maintained according to the same exacting standards she demanded of herself. Commander Prescott lingered behind the others. "Mitchell," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." She looked up, surprised. "For what, Commander?" "When your name was first proposed for this position, I opposed it. I thought you were too inexperienced, too specialized, too different from what we typically look for in federal instructors. I was wrong, and I'm glad I was overruled." The admission was unexpected but appreciated. "Thank you for telling me that." "You've transformed how we think about this aspect of our profession," Prescott continued. "And you've done it not by becoming like everyone else, but by being confidently, unapologetically yourself. That might be the most important lesson you've taught any of us." As Sarah completed her day at the training center, she reflected on the commander's words. Her journey had come full circle. From being dismissed because of her different approach to being valued precisely because of it. The qualities that had once marked her as an outsider were now recognized as essential contributions to the profession she loved. Walking back to her office, Sarah passed the center's main classroom building, where new instructors were being certified. Through the windows, she could see Lieutenant Reyes confidently presenting a session on precision shooting fundamentals, her approach clearly influenced by their morning conversation. The sight brought a smile to Sarah's face. Her impact would extend beyond the methods she had developed or the scores she had achieved. It would live on in the officers who found the courage to trust their own approaches, who discovered that excellence didn't require conformity, who learned that sometimes the quiet, methodical ones changed everything. 2 years later, Sarah's office at the National Advanced Tactical Training Institute looked out over a campus that hadn't existed when her journey began. The sprawling facility in Colorado represented the culmination of her work. A dedicated center where law enforcement agencies from around the world sent their instructors to learn the integrated shooting methodology she had pioneered. The morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating walls covered with framed articles from professional journals. "Mitchell Method transforms tactical training," declared the cover of Law Enforcement Today. "Mathematical marksmanship, the science behind the new standard," announced the Police Chief Association quarterly. Sarah sipped her coffee as she reviewed the day's training schedule. 3 specialized courses were running simultaneously. Environmental ballistics for northern agencies dealing with extreme weather conditions, precision under pressure for emergency response teams, and instructor certification for those who would take her methods back to their departments. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Deputy Director Marcus Coleman entered, a thick folder under his arm and an expression of barely contained excitement on his face. As the operational head of the institute, Coleman had been instrumental in securing the funding and political support that had transformed Sarah's curriculum from a departmental program to a national initiative. "The results are in," he announced without preamble, placing the folder on her desk. 1 year of nationwide implementation data from the 500 departments using our protocols. The statisticians have been analyzing it for months. Sarah opened the folder carefully. These numbers represented the true test of her methods, not theoretical advantages or isolated successes, but systematic implementation across diverse agencies in real-world conditions. The first page contained a simple summary graph, but its implications were profound. Officer-involved shooting accuracy improved by 23% across all participating departments. She read aloud, her voice reflecting disbelief despite the evidence before her. Departmental qualification scores increased by an average of 17%. Critical incident survival rate improved by 9%. Coleman nodded, his expression serious despite the positive results. "Those aren't just statistics, Sarah. That 9% represents officers who came home to their families because they could perform effectively under the worst possible conditions. The realization struck her with unexpected force. What had begun as a personal response to being underestimated had evolved into something that was saving lives. Her meticulous approach, once dismissed as too delicate, too precise, too academic for real police work, was now protecting officers in life-or-death situations. There's more, Coleman continued, turning to the next section. Accidental discharge incidents decreased by 41%. Weapons maintenance failures dropped by 36%. Range safety violations reduced by 53%. These numbers told another important story. Her emphasis on understanding fundamental principles rather than just following procedures had created a culture of conscious competence. Officers weren't just shooting better. They were handling their equipment more safely, maintaining it more effectively, and approaching their responsibilities with greater awareness. The FBI director called this morning, Coleman added. They've analyzed the performance of their tactical teams before and after implementing your protocols. The improvement is so significant that they're making it mandatory for all field offices nationwide. Sarah closed the folder, momentarily overwhelmed by its implications. I never expected this level of impact, she admitted. I was just trying to find a way to succeed in a system that wasn't designed for someone like me. Coleman smiled. That's precisely why it worked. You weren't trying to change the existing approach. You were creating something new because you had to. Sometimes, the most important innovations come from people who don't fit the established patterns. As he left her office, Sarah turned to the window, looking out at the training ranges where dozens of officers were practicing techniques that had once existed only in her personal notes. The journey from outsider to innovator had been neither quick nor easy, but its impact extended far beyond anything she could have imagined. Her intercom buzzed, interrupting her reflection. Officer Mitchell, your 9:30 appointment is here. The delegation from the International Tactical Officers Association. Send them in, she replied, straightening her uniform and gathering the presentation materials for their meeting. The door opened to reveal 5 visitors, senior tactical commanders from agencies across Europe and Asia, their expressions reflecting the professional curiosity that had brought them halfway around the world. Their presence was testament to how far her influence had spread, no longer limited to American law enforcement, but recognized globally as a fundamental advancement in tactical training. Welcome to the Institute. Sarah greeted them, extending her hand. I understand you're interested in implementing our integrated methodology across your respective agencies. The leader of the delegation, Commander Viktor Petrov from Russia's Special Rapid Response Unit, spoke first. Officer Mitchell, your reputation precedes you. We have been following your work with great interest. The results your methods have achieved are unprecedented. We've spent decades approaching tactical marksmanship as primarily a physical discipline, added Captain Isabella Moretti from Italy's Carabinieri Special Operations Division. Your mathematical framework offers an entirely new perspective, one that our preliminary testing suggests could transform our capabilities. The meeting lasted 2 hours, covering everything from implementation strategies to instructor certification requirements. Throughout the discussion, Sarah was struck by how completely the tactical community had embraced principles that had once been dismissed as unnecessary or impractical. These weren't enthusiastic rookies or theoretical academics. They were hardened veterans of some of the world's most elite units, yet they were approaching her work with genuine respect and interest. As the delegation departed to observe afternoon training exercises, Sarah's assistant handed her a reminder about her next appointment. A video conference with the Congressional Committee that was considering standardizing her protocols for all federal law enforcement agencies. The political recognition was gratifying, but it was the practical impact that mattered most to her. Officers performing better, working more safely, and returning home to their families. The video conference went smoothly, with committee members asking thoughtful questions about implementation costs and training requirements. Senator Eleanor Walsh, the committee chair, concluded with a personal observation that caught Sarah by surprise. Officer Mitchell, I've been reviewing your personnel file from your early days at Riverside PD. It seems remarkable that someone who was once described as, quote, too delicate and, quote, excessively analytical for tactical operations is now setting the standard for the entire profession. Would you care to comment on that journey? Sarah considered the question carefully. This wasn't just about her personal experience. It was about institutional culture and how organizations either nurture or suppress different kinds of excellence. Senator, I believe my story reflects something important about innovation in any field. Progress rarely comes from doing the same things better. It comes from doing different things entirely. Organizations that value diversity of thought, that make space for people who approach problems differently, gain access to solutions they wouldn't otherwise discover. Walsh nodded appreciatively. Well said, and a lesson that extends far beyond law enforcement. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah made her way to the Institute's main training range, where the day's most important event was scheduled. The graduation ceremony for the first class of master instructors who would bring her methods to departments across the country. 20 officers from diverse backgrounds stood at attention, representing the future of tactical training in American law enforcement. Among them was Lieutenant Sophia Reyes, now one of the most promising instructors in the program. Their conversation 2 years earlier had been the beginning of a mentoring relationship that had helped the younger officer navigate her own professional journey. Reyes had not only mastered Sarah's methods, but had developed innovations of her own, particularly in adapting the principles for officers with different physical capabilities. Today marks not just your certification as instructors, Sarah told the assembled graduates, but your commitment to transforming how we approach one of our profession's most critical skills. You'll return to your departments carrying not just techniques, but a philosophy, one that values understanding over memorization, principles over procedures, and conscientious preparation over unconscious habit. She paused, looking at the diverse group before her. Men and women from departments large and small, urban and rural, with different backgrounds and experiences, but a shared commitment to excellence. Some of you will face resistance. There will be those who question your methods, who prefer the familiar to the effective, who mistake precision for weakness. When that happens, remember this: your results will speak louder than any objection. Trust your training, believe in your approach, and let performance be your answer. The ceremony concluded with each graduate receiving their Master Instructor certification. As Sarah shook Reyes's hand, the younger officer spoke quietly. "Thank you for showing me it was possible. Without your example, I might have given up." "You would have found your own way," Sarah replied, "but I'm glad I could help make the path a little clearer." That evening, as most of the Institute staff departed for the day, Sarah found herself drawn to the Special Projects range, where her team was developing the next generation of training protocols. The facility was quiet, the advanced targeting systems powered down, the environmental controls set to standby. She walked slowly through the space, remembering how it had all begun, a single handmade ballistics chart, created out of necessity because no one else understood what she was trying to achieve. Now that solitary effort had evolved into a comprehensive methodology supported by sophisticated technology, institutional backing, and international recognition. A sound from the equipment room caught her attention. Inside, she found Technical Director Jason Rivera, formerly Technical Officer Martinez from Riverside PD, working late on a prototype targeting system. "Still here, Rivera?" she asked, surprised to find anyone else in the building at this hour. He looked up from his work with a grin. "Just finishing some adjustments to the new adaptive target system. The environmental sensors weren't calibrating properly with the ballistic tracking algorithm." Sarah nodded, recognizing in his meticulous attention to detail something of her own approach. Martinez had been one of the first to recognize the value of her methods back at Riverside, and when she'd established the Institute, he'd been among her first recruits. "You know," he said, setting aside his tools, "I was thinking about that qualification day at Riverside. Remember how everyone ignored your warning about the ammunition inconsistency? Hard to forget," she replied with a slight smile. "I've been in law enforcement for 18 years now," he continued, "and I've seen all kinds of officers come and go. The ones who last, who really make a difference, aren't always who you'd expect. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, the careful ones, the ones who see things differently." His observation struck a chord. Throughout her journey, Sarah had encountered many officers who, like herself, didn't fit the traditional mold. Thoughtful analysts, meticulous technicians, careful planners, whose contributions were often overlooked in a culture that celebrated a particular kind of boldness. "The profession needs all types," she agreed. "The instinctive responders and the analytical thinkers. the quick decision-makers, and the careful planners. The strength of any organization comes from that diversity of approach. As she left the institute that night, Sarah paused in the parking lot, looking back at the facility that represented her life's work. The building stood solid against the Colorado twilight, its training ranges quiet now, but ready for tomorrow's activities. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from being dismissed as too delicate for real police work to establishing the standard by which tactical excellence was measured. The path hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when she'd questioned whether she belonged in a profession that seemed to value qualities so different from her own. The answer had come not in changing who she was, but in demonstrating why her different approach mattered. She hadn't needed to become more aggressive, more instinctive, more conventionally tactical. She had needed to show how precision, analysis, and meticulous preparation could achieve results that other methods couldn't match. 3 days later, Sarah found herself back at Riverside Police Department for the first time in nearly 3 years. The occasion was significant. The dedication of the department's new training facility, named in her honor despite her protests that such recognition was premature. As she walked through the familiar hallways, she was struck by how much had changed. The department that had once overlooked her contributions now proudly displayed her achievements. Officers who had dismissed her approach now taught her methods to new recruits. The culture that had once defined excellence narrowly had expanded to recognize different paths to the same goal. Chief Michael Reynolds, who had replaced the retired Major Anderson, greeted her warmly. "Officer Mitchell, it's an honor to have you back. Your influence is felt here every day, not just in how we train, but in how we think about what makes an effective officer." The dedication ceremony was attended by the entire department, from veteran commanders to the newest academy graduates. As Sarah stood at the podium, looking out at faces both familiar and new, she reflected on the importance of the moment. Not for her personally, but for what it represented about institutional change. "This facility isn't really about me," she told the assembled officers. "It's about an idea that excellence comes in many forms, that different approaches strengthen rather than weaken us, and that sometimes the qualities that make someone seem unsuited for a role are exactly what allow them to transform it." She paused, making eye contact with the newer officers who had never known the department before her methods became standard practice. "When I stood on the qualification range here years ago, I was considered too delicate, too precise, too analytical for tactical work. Those perceived weaknesses turned out to be strengths that no one had recognized yet. Remember that when you encounter colleagues whose approaches differ from your own, what looks like a limitation might actually be an advantage we haven't yet understood." After the ceremony, as officers gathered for refreshments, Sarah noticed a young recruit standing slightly apart from the group, observing rather than participating in the animated conversations around her. Something in the officer's demeanor, careful, thoughtful, slightly reserved, struck a familiar chord. Sarah approached her. "First year on the force?" The young woman straightened immediately. "Yes, ma'am. Officer Rachel Chen. Just completed academy training last month." "How are you finding the department?" Chen hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "It's different than I expected. In a good way. The training emphasizes understanding principles rather than just following procedures. It values precision and preparation alongside quick reactions." Sarah nodded. That wasn't always the case. This department, like many others, has evolved in how it recognizes different kinds of excellence. "Your methods are a big part of our curriculum," Chen added. "The instructors say you changed how the entire profession approaches tactical training." "That wasn't my goal," Sarah replied honestly. "I was just trying to succeed in a system that wasn't designed for someone with my approach." The wider impact came later, after others recognized that different methods could achieve better results. As they talked, Sarah recognized in the younger officers something of herself, not just in her methodical approach, but in her determination to find her own path rather than conforming to expectations. The difference was that Chen was beginning her career in a department that had already learned to value diverse approaches, that recognized precision as strength rather than weakness, that understood how different perspectives improved overall performance. That evolution, from a culture that recognized only one kind of excellence to one that valued diverse approaches, was perhaps the most significant aspect of Sarah's legacy. She had not only developed methods that improved tactical performance, she had helped create space for officers whose strengths didn't fit traditional patterns. As she prepared to leave Riverside and return to the Institute, Chief Reynolds walked her to her car. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "the department's qualification scores are the highest in the state. Our safety record is exemplary. Our tactical responses are more effective than ever before." "I'm glad to hear it," Sarah replied. "Your instructors have done excellent work implementing the integrated methodology." Reynolds shook his head. "It's more than the methods, though they're certainly important. It's the culture you helped create, one that values different kinds of excellence, that makes space for officers with diverse approaches, that recognizes how various strengths complement each other." As she drove away from the department that had once considered her too delicate for real police work, Sarah reflected on how completely things had changed, not just for her personally, but for the profession as a whole. The journey that had begun with a single qualification, a handmade ballistics chart, and the courage to trust her own approach had transformed not just her career, but the standards by which tactical excellence was measured. She had found her place not by becoming like everyone else, but by being confidently, unapologetically herself. And in doing so, she had created space for others to do the same, to contribute their unique perspectives, to approach challenges differently, to demonstrate that excellence took many forms. The road ahead stretched toward the mountains where the Institute awaited, where tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities to advance the work she had begun. But for now, Sarah Mitchell, once dismissed as too delicate for weapons, now recognized as the officer who had outshot not just her department, but conventional wisdom itself, drove toward the future she had helped create, where precision was strength, preparation was power, and different didn't mean wrong. It meant essential. 5 years after the establishment of the National Advanced Tactical Training Institute, Sarah stood before an audience, unlike any she had addressed before. The United Nations Peacekeeping Conference in Geneva had gathered military and police representatives from 47 countries, all facing the common challenge of operating effectively in high-stress environments where split-second decisions carried life-or-death consequences. The Grand Assembly Hall, with its polished wood panels and dignified atmosphere, was far removed from the shooting ranges and tactical classrooms where Sarah had spent most of her career. Yet the attention focused on her presentation was just as intense, perhaps even more so, given the international implications of her work. "The principles we've developed aren't limited to any single weapon system, operational environment, or organizational structure," she explained, her voice carried clearly through the sophisticated translation system. "They represent a fundamental shift in how we understand human performance under pressure, a shift from relying primarily on instinct and reaction to integrating analytical understanding with physical capability." On the massive screen behind her, data from global implementation studies showed consistent results across vastly different agencies: improved accuracy, reduced casualties, enhanced decision-making, and more effective responses in crisis situations. The methodology that had begun with a single officer's effort to overcome institutional bias had evolved into an international standard that transcended cultural and organizational differences. "What we've discovered," Sarah continued, "is that the integration of precise calculation with practical application creates capabilities that neither approach could achieve alone. When officers understand the mathematical principles behind their actions, they make better decisions in situations where there is no time to calculate, because the principles have become intuitive through practice and understanding." After her presentation, the questions came from representatives across the spectrum of global security operations, from Norwegian Special Forces to Kenyan National Police, from Brazilian tactical units to Japanese counter-terrorism teams. Despite their diverse backgrounds and operational environments, all recognized the potential of Sarah's integrated methodology to transform their capabilities. Ambassador Eliana Diaz, the conference chair, summarized the consensus. "Officer Mitchell's work represents one of those rare innovations that changes not just techniques, but fundamental paradigms. What began as a personal response to institutional limitations has become a global standard that transcends national boundaries and organizational cultures." The international recognition was gratifying, but as Sarah spoke with representatives during the reception that followed, she found herself more interested in the personal stories that emerged. Accounts of officers whose approaches had been dismissed, whose methodologies had been questioned, whose perspectives had been undervalued until results proved their worth. Colonel Nadia Ibrahim from Jordan's Special Operations Division shared her experience. For years, my emphasis on precision was considered excessive, almost obsessive. In real combat, you won't have time for such careful calculation, they told me. Your methodology gave me the framework to prove that precision doesn't slow response. It enhances it. Captain Jean-Pierre Dubois from France's GIGN counterterrorism unit had a similar story. I was always the analyst, the planner, the one who insisted on understanding systems rather than just operating them. My approach was tolerated but not valued, until your protocols demonstrated that comprehensive understanding produces superior results in crisis situations. These conversations revealed a pattern that transcended national boundaries and organizational cultures. In tactical operations worldwide, certain approaches were valued while others were marginalized, often based on tradition rather than effectiveness. Sarah's work had created space for officers whose strengths didn't match conventional expectations, whose contributions had been overlooked because they came in unfamiliar forms. As the Geneva conference concluded, Sarah received an unexpected invitation. The International Committee of the Red Cross requested her assistance in developing training protocols for humanitarian security teams operating in conflict zones. These teams faced unique challenges. They needed tactical capabilities but operated under strict non-violence mandates, requiring unprecedented precision and restraint. Your methodology offers something we haven't found elsewhere, explained Dr. Marie Laurent, the ICRC's security coordinator. The integration of precise calculation with practical application creates the kind of conscious competence our teams need to navigate extremely complex situations. This application of her work, extending beyond traditional law enforcement to humanitarian operations, represented a new frontier that Sarah had never anticipated. The principles she had developed to overcome institutional bias in police departments were now being adapted to save lives in some of the world's most dangerous environments. Upon returning to the Institute in Colorado, Sarah found her team engaged in a new initiative that reflected this expanding influence. Developing specialized protocols for medical emergency responders, disaster management teams, and other non-law enforcement organizations that operated under extreme pressure. Deputy Director Coleman briefed her on the developments. We've had requests from hospital emergency departments, wilderness rescue teams, even commercial airline pilots. They all face the same fundamental challenge: making optimal decisions under extreme pressure, with limited information and significant consequences. The Institute was evolving beyond its original mission, becoming a center for understanding human performance in all high-stakes environments. Sarah's office wall now displayed not just law enforcement journals but medical publications, aviation safety bulletins, and disaster response analyses, all featuring adaptations of her integrated methodology. This expansion brought new partnerships, including a groundbreaking collaboration with Dr. Elisa Santiago, a neuroscientist specializing in decision-making under stress. Dr. Santiago had been studying the neurological impact of Sarah's training protocols and had made a fascinating discovery. Your methodology actually changes how the brain processes information under pressure, she explained during their first meeting. Traditional tactical training primarily strengthens automatic responses, what we call System 1 thinking. Your integrated approach creates stronger connections between System 1 and System 2, between instinctive reaction and analytical understanding. This scientific validation added a new dimension to Sarah's work. It wasn't just that her methods produced better performance. They fundamentally changed how practitioners processed information and made decisions. The integration of calculation and application created a distinctive neural pattern that enhanced capabilities across diverse situations. The most significant finding, Dr. Santiago continued, is that practitioners trained in your methodology show better performance not just in the specific scenarios they've practiced, but in novel situations they've never encountered before. They develop a kind of adaptive expertise that traditional training doesn't produce. This explains something Sarah had observed but couldn't fully articulate. Officers trained in her integrated methodology seemed to handle unexpected challenges more effectively, adapting to novel situations with greater flexibility and precision than their traditionally trained counterparts. The collaboration with Dr. Santiago led to a new generation of training protocols that explicitly focused on developing this adaptive expertise, teaching officers not just how to respond to known scenarios, but how to analyze and adapt to unprecedented situations. This evolution represented a significant advancement in the field, moving beyond standardized responses to cultivate genuinely flexible capability. As these developments unfolded, Sarah received a call from an unexpected source, the White House Office of National Security Affairs. The president's advisors had been following the international impact of her work and requested a briefing on potential applications for national security operations. The meeting in Washington brought Sarah into contact with leaders from military special operations, intelligence agencies, and diplomatic security services. Organizations with vastly different missions, but a common need for personnel who could perform optimally under extreme pressure. What interests us most, explained National Security Advisor Jonathan Pierce, is how your methodology transcends the traditional division between analysts and operators. In our world, we typically have people who think and people who act. Different personalities, different training, different career paths. Your integrated approach suggests there's a better way. This observation struck at the heart of institutional cultures across many organizations. The artificial separation between analysis and action, between planning and execution, between understanding and performance. Sarah's work demonstrated that integration produced superior results, that the most effective practitioners combine both capabilities. The division is artificial and counterproductive, Sarah confirmed. Our data shows consistently that the most effective operators are those who deeply understand the principles behind their actions, and the most valuable analysts are those who comprehend the practical application of their insights. The discussion led to a pilot program implementing Sarah's methodology across selected units from different agencies, a cross-disciplinary initiative designed to break down institutional silos and develop personnel with integrated capabilities. The implications for national security operations were significant, potentially transforming how agencies selected, trained, and deployed their personnel. As Sarah returned to Colorado after the Washington meetings, she reflected on how completely her professional journey had transcended its origins. What had begun as a personal response to being underestimated had evolved into an approach that was reshaping operations across the spectrum of high-stakes human performance. The Institute itself reflected this evolution. What had started as a tactical training facility now encompassed multiple divisions. The original law enforcement programs, the Humanitarian Operations Center, the Emergency Response Unit, the Decision Science Laboratory, and the newly established National Security Division. Sarah's office overlooked this expanded campus, a physical manifestation of how her approach had grown beyond its original context. But amid the institutional growth and international recognition, she remained focused on the fundamental principle that had guided her from the beginning. The integration of precise understanding with practical application created capabilities that neither alone could achieve. This principle found its most personal expression in the mentoring program she had established, identifying promising officers whose approaches didn't fit conventional patterns and helping them develop their unique strengths rather than conforming to institutional expectations. Among her current mentees was Officer Maya Williams, a brilliant tactical analyst whose recommendations were often dismissed because she lacked field experience. Sarah had recognized in Williams' situation echoes of her own early career, a talented officer whose contributions were undervalued because they came in an unexpected form. The challenge isn't just proving your value, Sarah advised during their weekly meeting. It's maintaining your distinctive approach while demonstrating its relevance to operations. You don't need to become like everyone else. You need to show why your difference matters. Under Sarah's guidance, Williams had developed a tactical analysis system that allowed field officers to make better decisions in complex environments. Her approach had initially been resisted, too complicated for real-world application, according to one supervisor. But when tested in actual operations, it had significantly improved team performance and officer safety. "I was ready to give up," Williams admitted. "I thought I'd have to either abandon my analytical approach or leave field operations entirely. You showed me there was another path." This mentoring relationship represented what Sarah considered her most important work, not just developing methods but creating space for diverse approaches within institutions that traditionally valued conformity over innovation. Every officer who found their own path, rather than abandoning their distinctive strengths, represented a victory not just for individual careers but for the profession as a whole. The mentoring program had expanded beyond the institute, creating a network of practitioners across multiple disciplines who shared a common experience, having approaches that were initially dismissed but ultimately proved valuable. This community provided support, guidance, and validation for those navigating the challenging terrain between institutional expectations and individual capabilities. On a crisp autumn morning, as Sarah walked across the institute campus to observe a training exercise, she encountered Dr. Santiago emerging from the neuroimaging laboratory with a tablet displaying fresh research results. "We've confirmed something remarkable," the neuroscientist explained, her excitement evident. "The neural integration your methodology develops isn't just a specialized capability. It appears to enhance overall cognitive resilience. Practitioners show better stress management, improved decision-making, and enhanced learning capacity across multiple domains." This finding suggested implications far beyond tactical operations. The integration of precise calculation with practical application created a form of cognitive development that benefited practitioners in all aspects of their lives and careers. It wasn't just about shooting better or responding more effectively to crisis situations. It was about developing a more integrated approach to all complex challenges. "This may explain something we've observed anecdotally," Sarah replied. "Officers trained in our methodology report improvements in areas seemingly unrelated to tactical operations, financial decision-making, interpersonal communication, even family conflict resolution." The conversation continued as they walked toward the training area, discussing how these findings might influence future developments in the program. The potential applications extended beyond professional contexts to personal development, educational methods, and therapeutic approaches, anywhere human performance under pressure needed enhancement. The training exercise they observed demonstrated the latest evolution of Sarah's methodology, a scenario that required participants to integrate mathematical precision with physical performance while adapting to rapidly changing conditions. The officers moved through the course with a distinctive combination of calculated precision and fluid adaptation, demonstrating capabilities that traditional training couldn't produce. Deputy Director Coleman joined them as the exercise concluded. "The Joint Chiefs Chairman is visiting next week," he informed Sarah. "After seeing the results from the pilot program, they want to discuss implementing your methodology across all special operations training." This level of institutional adoption represented a validation that would have seemed impossible when Sarah stood on the Riverside PD range years earlier, dismissed as too delicate for real police work. The journey from that moment to international recognition and national security implementation reflected not just personal perseverance, but institutional evolution, organizations learning to value approaches they had once dismissed. That evening, as the institute quieted for the day, Sarah found herself drawn to the memorial wall that had been established near the main training facility. The wall honored officers whose lives had been saved through application of the integrated methodology. Situations where precision under pressure had made the difference between life and death. Each name represented not just a statistical outcome, but a human story. An officer who returned home to their family, who continued serving their community, who lived to make further contributions because they possessed capabilities that traditional training couldn't provide. As she stood before the wall, Sarah was joined by a visitor she hadn't expected. Retired Captain Bennett, her former rangemaster from Riverside PD, now in his 70s, but still carrying himself with military precision. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his voice softer than she remembered. "I was in Denver visiting my daughter, and thought I should see what you've built here. It's quite remarkable." They walked together through the quiet campus, Bennett absorbing the scope of what had evolved from the methods he had once dismissed. Their conversation was reflective, touching on the journey from those early days to the international impact her work now commanded. "I owe you an apology," Bennett said finally, echoing words he had spoken years earlier but with deeper understanding. "I didn't just underestimate your methods. I failed to recognize how institutional bias shapes what we value and what we dismiss. Your success isn't just a personal achievement. It's a lesson about how organizations limit themselves by recognizing only familiar forms of excellence." His insight captured something essential about Sarah's journey. It wasn't just about proving individual capability, but about challenging institutional assumptions, about demonstrating that excellence could take forms that traditional metrics might not recognize. "The most important thing I've learned," Sarah replied, "is that true innovation rarely comes from within established patterns. It emerges from those whose perspectives differ, whose approaches don't match expectations, whose strengths don't align with conventional metrics. The challenge for any organization is creating space for those differences rather than enforcing conformity." As Bennett departed, promising to send some of his current students to the Institute's civilian training programs, Sarah remained on the campus grounds, watching the sunset paint the Colorado mountains in deepening shades of gold and purple. The beauty reminded her of something essential. Amid all the technical precision, mathematical calculation, and operational methodology, the ultimate purpose remained profoundly human. Her work had evolved from personal vindication to professional validation to institutional transformation, but its essence remained unchanged, helping people perform at their best when it mattered most, enabling them to protect themselves and others, creating capabilities that saved lives and served communities. The Institute would continue to grow, the methodology would continue to evolve, and the applications would continue to expand. But the core principle would remain constant. The integration of precise understanding with practical application created capabilities that neither alone could achieve. And sometimes, the perspectives that seemed least aligned with institutional expectations were exactly those that could transform those institutions for the better. As darkness fell and the campus lights illuminated pathways between buildings, Sarah Mitchell, once dismissed as too delicate for weapons, now recognized as having transformed how human performance was understood and developed, walked toward her office to prepare for tomorrow's challenges. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But one thing was certain: being different wasn't a limitation to overcome. It was a strength to develop, a perspective to contribute, a gift to share. And sometimes, the quiet ones, the careful ones, the precise ones changed everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.